You carry weight that does not belong to you. Tonight, you will set it down. 13 people walked through suffering and found the exact moment it released them. Their stories have survived 25 centuries because they work. Some you may recognize, and that recognition matters. Each time you hear how Kisa Gotami discovered she was not alone, or how Sona learned to stop pushing until he broke, the teaching lands differently. Your life has changed. The weight you carry now is not the weight you carried yesterday. These are not lessons to memorize. They are doorways you walk through. Right now, wherever you are, lying in darkness in Chicago, sitting in afternoon light in Singapore, stealing quiet minutes in your car in Manchester, notice that you stopped. That stopping is already the beginning. The Buddha taught that suffering ends not when you gain something new, but when you release what you have been holding. Each story shows one person discovering what they could let go. Isolation, relentless striving, the need for certainty, clinging to what has passed, the belief you must save everyone, fear of change itself. By the end, you will know which burden to set down first. Your breath will slow before the first story ends. Your shoulders will drop before the second story finishes. This is not hope. This is what happens when you meet suffering that has already found its release. The first encounter begins now. A mother carries her dead child through the streets, desperate for medicine. What she finds transforms how she sees her grief. Kisa Gotami held her son against her chest as she walked through the morning streets of Savatthi. He had been sleeping for 3 days now, and she could not wake him. The neighbors had stopped offering help. Their eyes said what their mouths would not, that her child was gone, that she should accept this. But somewhere in this city, someone had medicine that would wake him. She knocked on doors before the sun had fully risen. An old woman answered, her face softening when she saw the bundle in Kisa's arms. "Please, do you have medicine for my son?" The woman reached out as if to touch the child, then pulled her hand back. "Dear one," she began, but Kisa was already turning away. She could not bear the pity. She needed medicine, not sympathy. By midday, she had visited every healer in the market district. They had given her the same look, spoken the same careful words. The weight of her son grew heavier with each step. What she knew was this: she would find help, or she would die, searching. Someone told her about a teacher staying at the monastery outside the city walls. Kisa walked through the afternoon heat, her son's body growing stiff against her shoulder, though she told herself he was only sleeping deeply. The Buddha sat beneath a tree when she arrived. His face held no pity, just a steady gaze that saw everything and judged nothing. "Teacher," she said, and her voice broke, "my son will not wake. Please, give me medicine." The Buddha looked at the child's face, then at hers. "I can help you," he said, and hope surged through her chest. "But I will need a special ingredient. Bring me a handful of mustard seed from a household that has never known death. Then I will prepare the medicine. Mustard seed. Every household had mustard seed. Kisa felt something like joy for the first time in 3 days. I will bring it at once, she said. The Buddha called after her, remember, it must come from a house that death has never touched. She waved her hand in acknowledgement. How hard could that be? The first house had a green door with flowers planted along the walkway. A young woman answered, a baby on her hip. Mustard seed? Of course. She returned with a clay jar. Kisa scooped a handful, then remembered the instruction. Has anyone in your household died? The woman's face changed. My father, last winter. Kisa poured the seeds back and moved to the next house. The second house had an older couple in the courtyard. They offered mustard seed before she asked, but when she posed her question, the man's eyes grew distant. Our daughter, 5 years ago. At the third house, a merchant answered. He had everything, he said, laughing, but his brother had died at sea. The fourth house had lost a grandmother. The fifth, a newborn. The sixth, a son in war. Kisa walked until the sun began to set. Every house had mustard seed. Every house had also known death. With each answer, something shifted inside her chest. The terrible uniqueness of her suffering began to crack like old pottery. She found herself on a hillside as darkness fell, looking down at the city. Lights appeared in windows one by one. Behind each light lived people who had lost someone. That window, perhaps a mother who had buried a child. That one, a wife who had become a widow. This light, children who would never see their father again. The entire city glowed with accumulated grief, and every single family had continued living somehow. Kisa looked down at her son's face in the fading light. His skin had gone grey. His small lips had pulled back from his teeth. She had been holding a corpse for 3 days, and everyone had known except her. But now she knew. She did not scream or collapse. The terrible isolation that had surrounded her simply dissolved. She was not cursed. She was not being punished. She was human, and this was what happened to humans. They loved, they lost, they somehow continued. She found a grove of trees and dug a grave with her bare hands as the moon rose. She wrapped her son in her shawl and laid him in the earth as gently as if putting him to bed. She spoke to him as she covered him with soil, told him she loved him, that she was sorry she had not let him rest sooner. When she finished, her hands were bleeding and caked with dirt, but her chest felt strangely light. She walked back to the monastery as dawn broke. The Buddha sat in the same place. I could not find the mustard seed you asked for, she said. I know, he replied. There is no house anywhere that death has not touched. You have discovered the nature of life. Kisa knelt before him. Teach me, she said. I do not want to be so lost that I cannot see what is real. The Buddha accepted her as his student that morning. Years later, Other monks would tell how she had a particular gift for comforting those who had lost loved ones, how she could sit with people in their grief without trying to fix them or rush them. She knew something they needed to know. You may have heard this story before, but each time you hear it, you bring different grief. When Kisa walked from house to house, she was not learning that death is sad. She was learning that the pain you feel is the pain humans have always felt. When you lose someone you love, when a relationship ends, when a dream dies, you join an ancient fellowship that stretches back to the beginning of human consciousness. The modern world hides death carefully. We tuck it away in hospitals and funeral homes, speak of it in hushed voices. We scroll through feeds where everyone seems perpetually happy, untouched by real suffering. We create the same illusion Kisa lived under, that somewhere exist households death has never entered. When death arrives at our door, we feel uniquely cursed. Walk through your neighborhood tonight and look at the lit windows. Behind each one lives someone who has lost something irreplaceable. The quiet man who waters his garden buried his wife 2 years ago. The woman who drives past each morning lost her sister to cancer. The teenager shooting baskets in the driveway will never meet his grandfather. Not one house stands untouched. This is not meant to depress you, but to connect you. When you sit with your own grief, you are not sitting alone. The isolation you feel is not the truth. You are surrounded by others who know this territory, who have walked this path, who understand without needing explanation. Kisa learned to ask a different question. Instead of, "Why is this happening to me?" she began to ask, "How do humans bear this?" The first question has no good answer and leads only to more suffering. The second connects you to everyone who has ever had to continue living after loss. When you ask how humans bear this, you discover they bear it together, that sharing grief somehow makes it lighter even though nothing about the loss has changed. The Buddha did not give Kisa medicine to wake her dead child, because no such medicine exists. He gave her a way to wake herself from the illusion of being alone in suffering. The mustard seed teaching is not about death. It is about connection. It is about discovering that what you thought made you different actually makes you human. Years later, Kisa would sit with newly grieving mothers and say very little. She did not offer platitudes about time healing wounds or loved ones being in better places. She simply sat with them in their rawness, in their disbelief, in their rage at a world that continues spinning when their world has stopped. Her presence said what words could not. "I know this place. I have walked this ground. You will survive this not because you are strong, but because humans always have, and I am here to remind you that you are not alone." This is the first release. Understanding that your suffering connects you to every human who has ever lived, rather than separating you from them. The weight you carry is not yours alone. It is the weight of being human, of loving in a world where everything is temporary, and millions of people right now are carrying it with you. They are there, behind their own lit windows, bearing what you are bearing, continuing as you will continue. The next encounter shows what happens when we try to continue by pushing too hard, by burning ourselves out in the effort to outrun pain. Sona's feet left small bloodstains on the walking path. He had been practicing walking meditation for hours, back and forth on the same stretch of ground, and the skin on his soles had worn through. But he could not stop. If he stopped, if he rested, if he gave himself even a moment's ease, he might never attain the freedom he sought. So he walked, and his feet bled, and he told himself this was what dedication looked like. Before he became a monk, Sona had been a musician. He had played the veena, a stringed instrument, at festivals and celebrations. His fingers had known exactly how to coax beauty from wood and wire. But that life felt distant now, almost like someone else's memory. He had given it all up to follow the Buddha's teaching, to find liberation from suffering. And if liberation required walking until his feet bled, then he would walk until his feet bled. The other monks had started avoiding him, not out of cruelty, but out of concern. They would suggest he rest, and he would shake his head. They would mention that the Buddha taught the middle way, and Sona would respond that perhaps his middle was different from theirs, that perhaps he needed to push harder. Eventually they stopped suggesting anything and simply watched him destroy himself with what he called practice. Sona slept 3 hours each night, sometimes less. He ate one small meal a day, telling himself that hunger sharpened concentration. He meditated until his back screamed and his knees went numb. And with each day that passed without breakthrough, without the flash of insight he was certain would come if he just pushed hard enough, the desperation inside him grew. One evening, after months of this relentless practice, Sona sat beneath a tree and allowed himself to think the thought he had been avoiding, "I am going to quit." The thought arrived not as defeat but as relief. He would return his robes, go back to his family, pick up his veena again. He was not cut out for this life. He had given everything he had, and it was not enough. As he sat with this decision, the Buddha appeared on the path. Sona had not seen him approach. The Buddha simply stood there, as if he had been waiting for this exact moment, and said, "Sona, may I sit with you?" Sona nodded, too exhausted to feel embarrassed about the tears on his face. The Buddha sat down beside him, not speaking for a long moment, just present in the way that made everything around him seem to settle and quiet. Then the Buddha asked, "Before you became a monk, what did you do?" Sona wiped his eyes. "I was a musician, Lord. I played the veena." The Buddha nodded as if this explained something. "Tell me, Sona, when you played the veena, if the strings were too loose, what happened?" Sona closed his eyes, remembering. "No sound, Lord, just dull thuds. The strings would not vibrate properly. And when the strings were too tight, they would snap, Lord. Or if they held, the sound was harsh, abrupt, unpleasant. The Buddha leaned back against the tree, and when the strings were neither too loose nor too tight, Sona's hands moved without thinking, as if holding an invisible instrument. Then the Veena sang, Lord. The tone was pure. You could play for hours without the strings breaking or going flat. The sound would fill a room, fill a courtyard. People would stop what they were doing just to listen. He opened his eyes and found the Buddha watching him with something that looked like affection. So it is with spiritual practice, the Buddha said. If your energy is too loose, too slack, you will make no progress. You will spend your days in comfort, but arrive nowhere. But if your energy is too tight, too forced, you will break. You will snap like an over-tightened string, and a broken string produces no music at all. Sona looked down at his bleeding feet, at his trembling hands, at the body he had been treating like an enemy that needed to be conquered. I thought I had to push harder than everyone else, he said quietly. I thought that was what dedication meant. The Buddha shook his head. Dedication means finding the tension that allows you to continue, not the tension that breaks you before you arrive. Something shifted in Sona's chest, like a knot loosening. He had spent months trying to force himself into enlightenment, believing that suffering equaled progress, that if he was not in pain, he was not trying hard enough. But he had forgotten what his hands already knew, that instruments need tuning, that the right tension produces beauty, while the wrong tension produces only noise or silence or breaking. How do I know when the tension is right? Sona asked. The Buddha smiled. Your body knows. Your breath knows. When you can sustain your practice day after day without collapsing, without fleeing, without breaking, then you have found your tuning. Not my tuning, not another monk's tuning, but yours. Sona began practicing differently after that conversation. He still rose early, still meditated, still walked. But he also rested when his body needed rest. He ate enough to maintain his strength. He slept enough to let his mind settle. The other monks noticed the change but said nothing, just nodded when they passed him on the path, his feet healing, his face less drawn. Within a year, Sona attained full enlightenment, not through pushing harder, but through finding the sustainable rhythm that allowed him to continue without destroying himself in the process. He would later teach this same lesson to other monks who came to him burning out, and he would always ask them, if you were tuning a veena, would you tighten the strings until they snapped? This story has survived 25 centuries because the question it asks has never stopped being relevant. How much effort is enough? We live in a culture that worships exhaustion, that treats burnout as a badge of honor, that suspects anyone who is not perpetually busy of being lazy or uncommitted. We have entire industries built on helping people optimize their productivity, squeeze more into each day, sleep less, do more, push harder. And we are snapping like over-tightened strings. You know this if you have ever worked yourself sick, if you have ever believed that rest was weakness, if you have ever measured your worth by how much you could endure. You know the particular exhaustion that comes not from hard work but from unsustainable work, from trying to maintain a pace that no human body was designed to hold. You know what it feels like when the string is about to snap. The Buddha did not tell Sona to stop practicing. He did not suggest that effort was the problem. He suggested that the wrong kind of effort, the kind that destroys rather than develops, was the problem. There is a difference between dedication and destruction, between commitment and collapse, between pushing through resistance and pushing past your actual limits. Sona had forgotten this difference because he had confused suffering with progress. If his feet bled, he must be getting somewhere. If he could barely stand, he must be close to breakthrough. But suffering is not the same as growth, and pain is not proof of dedication. Sometimes pain is just your body telling you that you are damaging yourself, that the string is too tight, that you need to adjust before you break. Think about the last time you pushed yourself too hard. Maybe it was at work, taking on more than any person could reasonably handle, because saying no felt like failure. Maybe it was in a relationship, trying to be everything for someone else while neglecting yourself completely. Maybe it was in your own expectations, holding yourself to standards that would break anyone. What did that feel like in your body? What happened to your sleep, your appetite, your ability to feel anything besides exhaustion? Now ask yourself the question the Buddha asked Sona: could you sustain that pace indefinitely? Could you maintain that level of intensity for months, for years, without something fundamental breaking? If the answer is no, then the string is too tight. And a string that is too tight produces harsh music at best, and at worst, it snaps. The middle way is not mediocrity. It is not settling or giving up or lowering your standards. It is finding the exact tension that allows you to continue, to sustain, to arrive at your destination without destroying yourself before you get there. A veena strung with perfect tension can play for hours, can produce beauty consistently, can last for years. A veena with strings too tight breaks during the first song. Your life is not a sprint where the person who suffers most wins. Your life is a long practice, and the only way to complete a long practice is to find a rhythm you can sustain. This means rest is not optional. This means listening to your body is not weakness. This means that when you feel the string getting too tight, when you notice yourself edging toward collapse, you stop and adjust before you break. Sona's bleeding feet were not a sign of dedication. They were a sign that he had lost his tuning, that he was trying to force an outcome rather than allow a process. When he learned to trust the middle way, when he found his sustainable rhythm, enlightenment came not as something he wrestled into submission, but as something that arose naturally from consistent, balanced practice. You do not need to bleed to prove you are trying. You do not need to collapse to demonstrate commitment. You need to find the tension that lets you continue tomorrow, and the day after that, and the day after that, until one day you look up and realize you have arrived somewhere you could never have reached by breaking yourself. This is the second release, understanding that sustainable effort, not maximum effort, is what carries you through. The string that sings is neither too loose nor too tight, and only you can feel when your own tuning is right. Trust that feeling more than you trust the voice that says you should be doing more, pushing harder, sleeping less. That voice does not care if you break, but you should care. You should care enough to find your middle way. The next encounter reveals what happens when the mind itself becomes the obstacle, when thinking about problems replaces solving them. Malunkyaputta had questions, and the questions were eating him alive. Every night as he lay down to sleep, they circled his mind like vultures. Is the universe finite or infinite? Does an enlightened being exist after death or not? Is the body different from consciousness or the same? These were not idle curiosities. They felt urgent, essential, like the foundation upon which everything else rested. How could he practice if he did not understand the nature of existence itself? He had been a monk for 3 years now, and the Buddha had never answered these questions. Malunkyaputta had asked them directly, had posed them to senior monks, had waited for a teaching that would finally address what seemed to him the most important issues of all. But the Buddha spoke instead about suffering, about craving, about the path to liberation. He talked about what to do, not what to believe about cosmic mysteries. And this felt to Malunkyaputta like an evasion, like the Buddha was withholding the real teaching. So one afternoon, after weeks of sleepless nights and mounting frustration, Malunkyaputta went to the Buddha with an ultimatum. He found him sitting beneath a tree, and without the usual courtesies, he said, "Lord, I need answers to certain questions, or I cannot continue as your student." The Buddha looked at him with the same calm gaze he gave everyone. "What questions, Malunkyaputta?" Malunkyaputta listed them, his voice growing more insistent with each one. Is the universe eternal or not eternal? Is it finite or infinite? Is the life force the same as the body or different? Does the enlightened one exist after death, not exist, both, or neither? He took a breath. "If you will answer these questions, I will continue as your disciple. If you will not answer them, then I must leave the Sangha." The Buddha let the words settle in the air between them. Then he asked, "Malunkyaputta, when you came to me and asked to be ordained, did I promise to answer these questions?" Malunkyaputta shifted his weight. "No, Lord." "Did you say to me, I will live the spiritual life under the Buddha only if he explains to me whether the universe is eternal or not eternal?" "No, Lord." "Then why," the Buddha said gently, "do you now demand what was never promised?" Malunkyaputta had no answer to this, but the question still burned in him. "Lord, these matters seem fundamental. How can I practice without understanding them?" The Buddha leaned back against the tree. "Let me tell you a story, Malunkyaputta. Suppose a man is struck by a poisoned arrow. His friends and relatives bring a surgeon to remove it. But the man says, "Wait. I will not let this arrow be removed until I know who shot me. What is his name? What clan does he belong to? Is he tall or short? Dark or fair?" The Buddha's voice took on a rhythm, painting the scene. The man continues, "What kind of bow did he use? What kind of bowstring? What kind of arrow shaft? What kind of feathers fletched the arrow? What kind of arrowhead? I will not allow treatment until I know all of this." Malunkyaputta could see where this was going, but the Buddha continued. "What would happen to that man, Malunkyaputta?" "He would die, Lord," Malunkyaputta said quietly. "He would die before all those questions could be answered." "Exactly," the Buddha said. "So too, if someone says, 'I will not live the spiritual life under the Buddha until he explains whether the universe is eternal or not eternal,' that person would die before these things could be explained." The Buddha shifted forward, and his voice grew more direct. "Whether the universe is eternal or not eternal, Malunkyaputta, there is still birth, aging, death, sorrow, pain, and despair. I teach the end of these things in this very life. Whether the universe is finite or infinite, you still suffer. Whether consciousness is the same as the body or different, you still experience craving, aversion, and delusion. Will knowing the answers to your questions remove the arrow of suffering from your heart?" Malunkyaputta sat with this. The honest answer was no. Even if the Buddha told him the universe was eternal, even if he explained in perfect detail the nature of existence after death, Malunkyaputta would still wake up tomorrow with the same anxieties, the same restless mind, the same subtle dissatisfaction that had driven him to become a monk in the first place. "What I teach is this," the Buddha said. "This is suffering. This is the origin of suffering. This is the cessation of suffering. This is the path leading to the cessation of suffering. Why do I teach this and not other things? Because this is useful. This leads to the end of suffering, to peace, to direct knowledge, to liberation. Your metaphysical questions do not lead there. They lead only to more questions, more speculation, more mental proliferation." Malunkyaputta felt something crack open in his chest, and with it came embarrassment, but also relief. He had been so certain that he needed answers before he could progress, that understanding the architecture of the universe was prerequisite to freedom. But he had been confusing the map with the territory, the description with the experience. He had been so busy demanding to know about the arrow that he had forgotten it was killing him. "Forgive me, Lord," Malunkyaputta said. "I have been asking the wrong questions." The Buddha smiled. "There are no wrong questions, Malunkyaputta. Only questions that help, and questions that do not help. You are free to spend your life contemplating whether the universe has an edge or goes on forever. But while you contemplate, the arrow remains and the poison spreads." Malunkyaputta returned to his practice after that conversation, and the questions that had consumed him slowly lost their urgency. They did not disappear. Occasionally they would arise, especially late at night when his mind wandered. But he learned to recognize them for what they were, not essential inquiries, but habitual patterns of thinking, ways his mind distracted itself from the harder work of actually transforming. You know this pattern if you have ever lost hours to spiraling questions that have no satisfying answers. If you have ever researched endlessly instead of acting, planned perpetually instead of beginning, demanded certainty before taking a single step. The questions feel important, feel urgent, feel like the responsible thing to ask before proceeding. But often they are just sophisticated forms of avoidance. What is my purpose? What if I am making the wrong choice? What does it all mean? How can I know for sure? These questions can be contemplated for a lifetime without ever arriving at answers that satisfy. And while you contemplate them, the arrow of your actual suffering remains lodged in your chest. The Buddha did not say, metaphysical questions are stupid or worthless. He said they are not useful for the thing you actually need: freedom from suffering. If your house is on fire, you do not stop to research the chemical composition of fire or the philosophical implications of transformation through flame. You get out of the house. You put out the fire. You deal with the urgent thing first. Your suffering is the urgent thing. Your anxiety, your stress, your sense of being trapped in patterns you cannot escape. This is the fire. This is the arrow. And the Buddha's radical claim is that you can address it without first understanding the entire metaphysical structure of reality. This is deeply countercultural in an age that worships information, that believes every question has an answer waiting to be Googled, that treats uncertainty as a problem to be solved through more research. We have access to more information than any generation in human history, and we are more paralyzed than ever. We are Malunkyaputta with smartphones, demanding to know everything about the arrow before we will allow anyone to pull it out. Notice what happens when you redirect the question. Instead of, "What is the meaning of life?" ask, "What reduces my suffering right now?" Instead of, "How can I know I am making the right choice?" ask, "What choice allows me to act with integrity today?" Instead of, "What is my purpose?" ask, "What needs doing that I can do?" The first questions have no definitive answers and lead to paralysis. The second questions can be answered through action. The Buddha taught that some things are worth knowing and some things are not worth the time they consume. Worth knowing: how suffering arises in your own mind, what feeds it, what diminishes it, what actions lead to more peace. Not worth the time: whether the universe had a beginning, what happens after death to enlightened beings, whether consciousness is generated by the body or independent of it. Not because these questions are meaningless, but because answering them does not remove your suffering. Malunkyaputta eventually became fully liberated, and when he did, The old questions still had no cosmic answers, but they also no longer mattered. He had discovered something more valuable than knowledge about the structure of reality. He had discovered freedom within reality, however it is structured. The arrow was gone. The poison had been neutralized, and it turned out you could live without knowing who shot the arrow or whether the universe has edges. This is the third release, understanding that some questions serve liberation and some serve only endless questioning. Your suffering is real and present. The tools for addressing it are available. You do not need permission from the cosmos to begin. You do not need absolute certainty about metaphysics to take the next right action. You need only to recognize the arrow, acknowledge the poison, and allow the healing that becomes possible when you stop demanding answers that will not heal you. But even after you stop asking useless questions, you may still be holding on to what once served you well, but now weighs you down. The Buddha once told his monks about a traveler who needed to cross a great expanse of floodwater. There was no bridge, no boat, no ferry waiting. On this side, danger and uncertainty. On the far shore, safety and continuation of the journey. The water between them was wide and treacherous, filled with debris from recent storms. The traveler assessed the situation and made a decision. He would build a raft. He gathered branches and logs, vines and grasses, whatever he could find along the shore. He worked for hours, binding the materials together, testing the structure, making sure it would hold his weight. His hands blistered from the work. His back ached from bending and lifting. But finally, he had something that would float, that would carry him across. The crossing was difficult. The current pulled at the raft, trying to drag it downstream. Waves washed over the surface, soaking him to the skin. Floating debris crashed into the sides, nearly breaking the bindings he had worked so hard to secure. But he held on, paddled with a makeshift oar, and slowly made his way to the other shore. When he finally dragged himself onto dry land, exhausted and shaking, he lay there for a long moment, feeling nothing but gratitude for the raft. It had saved his life. Without it, he would have drowned or been swept away by the current. As he caught his breath and looked at the crude structure that had carried him safely across, a thought arose. This raft is precious to me. I worked hard to make it. It saved my life. I should take it with me. So the traveler hoisted the raft onto his shoulders. Or perhaps he balanced it on his head. The Buddha told the story both ways, and both images are equally absurd. The man then continued his journey on dry land, carrying the heavy, dripping raft with him, the branches catching on trees, the weight making his neck ache, other travelers staring at him as he passed. The Buddha paused here and asked his monks, "What do you think? Would that man be acting wisely?" The monks laughed and said no, of course not. The raft had served its purpose. It belonged at the water's edge. either left for the next person who needed to cross, or pulled ashore and honored for its service. But carrying it on land made no sense. On land, it was not a raft anymore. It was just dead weight. Just so, the Buddha said, the teachings I give you are like a raft. They are for crossing over, not for holding on to. Even the teachings themselves should be let go when they have served their purpose, much more so the things that are not the teachings at all. This story has a surface meaning about spiritual teachings, about not clinging even to helpful philosophies once they have done their work. But it cuts deeper than that. It speaks to everything we carry past its usefulness, everything we hold on to because it once saved us, everything we cannot release because we confuse loyalty with imprisonment. Think about the relationship that rescued you from loneliness 10 years ago, but now feels like a cage. The job that saved you from poverty but now drains every ounce of energy you have. The identity you constructed to protect yourself in your 20s that now prevents you from becoming who you are in your 40s. The belief system that gave you structure when you needed it, but now feels rigid and suffocating. The coping mechanism that got you through trauma, but now keeps you from intimacy. All of these were rafts once. All of them served you, carried you across treacherous water, kept you from drowning. And all of them might now be things you are carrying on your head through dry land, wondering why your neck hurts, why other people look at you strangely, why you cannot move as freely as you once did. The difficulty is this: gratitude and clinging feel almost identical. Both involve holding close. Both involve not wanting to lose something valuable. But gratitude can say, "Thank you for getting me across," and set something down. Clinging says, "I cannot survive without this," and holds on past all reason. The traveler in the story was not wrong to value the raft. The raft was genuinely valuable, genuinely life-saving. The error was in failing to recognize when the context changed, when what was useful in water became useless on land. The error was in confusing honoring something with carrying it forever. You can honor the relationship that taught you what love could feel like while acknowledging it has run its course. You can be grateful for the job that paid your bills and gave you skills while recognizing it is time to move on. You can appreciate the version of yourself that survived difficult years while letting that version evolve into someone new. Honor and release are not opposites. Sometimes releasing is the most honoring thing you can do. But we resist this, and for good reasons. Letting go feels like betrayal when what we are releasing once saved us. It feels like ingratitude, like saying the raft was not good enough, like denying the service it provided. We tell ourselves, if this relationship once made me happy, who am I to leave it now? If this career once gave me purpose, how can I walk away? If this belief once gave me certainty, what does it say about me that I no longer believe it? What it says is that you crossed the water. You are on the other shore now. The raft did exactly what it was meant to do, and now the journey continues on different terrain that requires different tools. Notice the Buddha did not say, burn the raft, curse the raft, pretend the raft never helped. He said, leave it at the shore, pull it up so it does not float away, acknowledge its service. Maybe someone else will need it, and then continue your journey unencumbered. This is different from the modern tendency to dispose of things the moment they stop serving us, to discard relationships when they become difficult, to quit jobs at the first sign of boredom. The raft teaching is not about avoiding commitment or running from challenge. It is about recognizing when you are genuinely on the other shore versus still crossing the water. It is about the difference between difficulty that signals growth and difficulty that signals you are trying to use the wrong tool for the wrong terrain. How do you know the difference? Your body knows before your mind admits it. You know you are carrying a raft on dry land when the thing that once energized you now depletes you completely. When what once felt like protection now feels like prison. When you find yourself defending your choices more than living them. When you cannot imagine life without it, but also cannot imagine continuing with it much longer. When the weight on your shoulders is no longer the good weight of meaningful burden, but the dead weight of something whose time has passed. A woman stays in a marriage because it saved her from loneliness 20 years ago, even though now they barely speak. A man keeps working at a company because it rescued him from unemployment, even though he wakes up with dread every morning. Someone clings to a self-image built in youth because it protected them from vulnerability, even though it now prevents them from being seen. All rafts, all once necessary, all now being carried where they no longer belong. The teaching asks, can you set it down? Can you honor what it did for you and still release it? Can you trust that you do not need to carry across dry land what you needed to cross water? This is terrifying because it means accepting that nothing lasts forever, that what saves you in one season might suffocate you in another, that even good things have completion points. It means trusting that you will find new tools for new terrain, that you will not be left helpless without the raft, even though the raft genuinely saved you once. The traveler in the story had to trust that solid ground required different skills than water. He had to believe that his hands, which built one raft, could build other things, that his resourcefulness did not depend on carrying proof of past resourcefulness. He had to learn that gratitude looks like setting something down gently and continuing forward, not clutching it forever as insurance against future drowning. What raft are you carrying? What saved you once that you are now dragging through terrain where it makes no sense? What are you loyal to past the point of actual use because you believe releasing it would mean you were never grateful for its service? The Buddha taught that everything useful has appropriate context. The raft is perfect in water and absurd on land. Neither fact diminishes the raft. It simply means the raft is not universal, not required forever, not meant to be carried as proof of your journey, but used during your journey and then honored by letting it serve its purpose fully and completely, which includes ending. When you set down the raft, your hands are free. Your shoulders drop. Your neck stops aching. You can move faster, turn more easily, pick up new things when new things are needed. And the raft remains what it always was, something that carried you across when you needed carrying, something that deserves your gratitude precisely because it did its work so well that you made it to the other shore. This is the fourth release, learning to honor what helped you by letting it complete its service rather than forcing it to serve forever in contexts where it no longer fits. Gratitude does not mean carrying something until you collapse. It means recognizing when the crossing is finished and the raft belongs at the water's edge, serving its purpose by being exactly what it was meant to be and nothing more. But what happens when you cannot let go because you believe everyone else depends on you to hold everything together? A teacher of acrobatics and his young apprentice, Medakathalika, were preparing for a performance in the village square. Their act was simple but dangerous. The teacher would balance a tall bamboo pole on his shoulders, and the apprentice would climb to the top and perform movements while perched there. One slip from either of them, and both would fall. One wobble, one moment of lost concentration, and they would both be injured, possibly killed. Before they began their practice, the teacher gave his apprentice what he thought was wise instruction. Medakathalika, you protect me, and I will protect you. This way, guarding one another, we will display our skill, make a good profit, and come down safely from the bamboo pole. It sounded reasonable, even caring. It sounded like partnership, like the kind of mutual support that keeps people safe. But Medakathalika, young as she was, saw something her teacher had missed. She looked up at him and said, "That is not the way to do it, teacher. You should protect yourself, and I will protect myself. Thus, each guarding ourselves, we will display our skill, make a good profit, and come down safely from the bamboo pole." The Buddha later told this story to his monks and added, "It is just as the apprentice said. When you protect yourself, you protect others. When you protect others, you protect yourself." He was teaching something that runs counter to almost everything we are told about goodness, about sacrifice, about what it means to care for other people. We are taught from childhood that good people put others first, that mothers should sacrifice everything for children, that employees should stay late to help the team, that friends should drop everything when someone needs them. We learn that setting boundaries is selfish, that saying no is cruel, that if you are not exhausted from caring for others, then you must not care enough. But Medakathalika understood something crucial. She could not protect her teacher. She was 20 feet in the air, balancing on a pole balanced on his shoulders. If she tried to watch him, instead of watching herself, if she worried about his footing instead of her own balance, they would both fall. Her only way to keep him safe was to stay stable herself. This is not a metaphor. This is mechanics, physics, the basic architecture of interdependence. When you are connected to someone, when your stability affects their stability, your self-care becomes the foundation of their safety. When you collapse, everyone connected to you feels the impact. A parent who runs themselves into exhaustion, trying to give their children everything, cannot actually give their children what children most need. A parent who is present, regulated, capable of joy. A therapist who does not tend their own mental health cannot hold space for clients' suffering without eventually drowning in it. A caregiver who never rests becomes the one who needs care, and then who cares for the person they were caring for. You know this if you have ever tried to help someone while you yourself were falling apart. You know the particular desperation of reaching out to catch another person when you are not standing on solid ground. You know what happens. You both go down. The teacher's mistake was not his desire to protect his apprentice. His mistake was thinking protection works by watching the other person instead of by maintaining his own stability. If he focused on her balance up there, trying to shift his shoulders to correct her wobbles, he would lose his own footing. The pole would tilt. She would fall and bring him down with her. But if he focused entirely on planting his feet, on keeping his core stable, on maintaining his own center of gravity, then the pole stayed steady. And a steady pole gave her a stable platform to work from. His self-protection was her protection. Her self-protection was his protection. Not because they did not care about each other, but precisely because they did. This is especially hard for people who have been praised for self-sacrifice, who have built entire identities around being the one who gives endlessly, who never complains, who always has energy for one more person's crisis. For them, Medicathalika's words sound like permission to be selfish, like abandoning the people who depend on them. But notice what Medicathalika was not saying. She was not saying, "I will take care of myself, and you can fall. I do not care what happens to you." She was saying, "The way I take care of you is by taking care of myself, because we are structurally connected, and my stability is your stability." There is a difference between self-care and selfishness that you can feel in your body if you pay attention. Selfishness hoards resources while others are genuinely in need. Selfishness says, "I refuse to help, even though I easily could, because your suffering is not my problem." Self-care says, "I cannot help right now because I am not stable enough, and if I try to help from this place, we will both fall." Selfishness comes from a place of abundance, refusing to share. Self-care comes from a place of depletion, acknowledging limits. You know which one you are doing. Your body knows, even when your mind tries to justify. When you say no to something because you genuinely do not have capacity, your body relaxes slightly. When you say no because you do not want to share resources you have, your body tenses with defensiveness. When you rest because you need rest, there is ease even in the guilt. When you avoid because you do not want to deal with difficulty, there is agitation even in the relief. The bamboo pole teaching asks you to examine your actual structural position. Are you the one holding the pole, the one balancing on top, or somewhere in between? And what does your position require for everyone's safety? If you are the pole holder, and you try to catch the person above you when they start to fall, you both go down. If you are the one balanced above, and you try to steady the person below you, you lose your own balance and fall onto them. The only way this works is if each person maintains their own position with full attention and presence. This does not mean isolation. This does not mean refusing all help or never depending on anyone. It means understanding that dependence works when each person brings their full structural integrity to the connection. The pole needs the ground to be stable. The person on top needs the pole to be stable. But the ground cannot stand for the pole, and the pole cannot balance for the person on top. Each element must do its own work. You see the opposite of this in relationships where one person has made themselves responsible for another person's emotional state, where a wife manages her husband's moods by never saying anything that might upset him, where a parent tries to protect their child from every disappointment by fixing every problem, where a friend becomes the unpaid therapist for someone who will not actually seek help. These arrangements feel like love, like devotion, like the right thing to do, but they are the teacher's mistake, not the apprentice's wisdom. The wife trying to manage her husband's moods loses her own emotional footing. The parent fixing every problem prevents the child from developing their own problem-solving capacity. The friend playing therapist burns out and then has nothing left to give. Everyone falls eventually because the structure was unstable from the beginning. Medakathalika's way works differently. Each person tends their own balance, and in doing so, creates reliable support for the other. The husband learns to manage his own emotional reactions because his wife will not sacrifice her peace to tiptoe around them. The child develops resilience because the parent trusts them to handle manageable difficulties. The friend maintains their own well-being and therefore remains available for genuine connection rather than codependent rescue. This requires trusting that other people have their own capacity to stand, to balance, to manage themselves. And when they genuinely do not have that capacity, when someone is in real crisis, real danger, real need, then you assess whether you are actually stable enough to help, or whether your attempt to help will just add your body to the pile of fallen people. Sometimes the most helpful thing you can do is say, "I cannot hold this for you right now, but I can help you find someone who can." Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is maintain your own stability rather than dive into someone else's chaos and drown together. This is not abandonment. This is structural honesty. The Buddha affirmed the apprentice's wisdom because he understood that suffering spreads through connection. When you neglect yourself in service of others, your depletion becomes their burden. Your resentment, your exhaustion, your collapse, these all affect the people connected to you. Your self-sacrifice does not actually protect them from suffering. It just changes what they suffer from and adds your suffering to the mix. But when you protect yourself, when you maintain boundaries, when you rest, when you feed your own needs and tend your own balance, you become reliable support. You become the steady pole, the solid ground, the stable platform that others can work from. Not because you are doing it for them, but because structural integrity benefits everyone in the structure. This is the fifth release, understanding that self-protection and mutual protection are not opposites, but the same movement seen from different angles. When you guard your own balance, you guard everyone connected to you. When you maintain your own footing, you provide stable ground for others to stand on. Not selfishness, but structural wisdom. Not abandonment, but the only kind of support that actually holds over time. When each person tends their own balance, they can finally see clearly what they have been avoiding, and a sheltered prince was about to discover what his father's protection had hidden from him. Siddhartha grew up behind walls, designed to keep reality out. His father, King Suddhodana, had received a prophecy when his son was born. The child would become either a great king or a great spiritual teacher. The father wanted a king, not a renunciant, so he made a decision. He would build a world so perfect, so insulated from suffering, that his son would never question existence, never seek anything beyond the pleasures of palace life. So Siddhartha's childhood was orchestrated like a beautiful play. 3 palaces, one for each season, each filled with every luxury imaginable. Musicians and dancers, the finest foods, the most beautiful companions. And most importantly, no old people, no sick people, no dead bodies, no evidence that life contained anything but youth and health and pleasure. The king's servants had instructions. When Siddhartha walked in the gardens, any wilted flowers were to be removed before he saw them. Any servant who showed signs of aging was to be replaced with younger staff. The prince was to see only perfection, only permanence, only the illusion that nothing ever changes or ends. And for 29 years, this worked. Siddhartha married, had a son, lived the life his father had designed for him. But something in him was restless, some vague sense that the walls were hiding something important. One day, Siddhartha asked his charioteer to take him beyond the palace grounds to see the city. His father agreed, but sent word ahead: clear the streets of anyone, old, sick, or dying. Maintain the illusion just a little longer. But you cannot control a city the way you can control a palace. And what happened next, the texts say, was arranged by devas, by gods who knew the prince needed to wake up. Whether gods or chance, or simply the impossibility of hiding reality forever, Siddhartha encountered what his father had spent 3 decades keeping from him. The first encounter was with an old person, bent back, white hair, skin loose and wrinkled, walking with difficulty. Siddhartha had never seen anything like this. He asked his charioteer, "What has happened to that person?" The charioteer, unable to lie, said, "That is old age, my prince. It comes to everyone who lives long enough. The body weakens, the senses dim. What was once strong becomes fragile." Siddhartha felt something shift in his chest. "Will this happen to me?" "Yes, my prince. To you, to me, to everyone." The second encounter was with a sick person. Fever, trembling, unable to stand without help. Again Siddhartha asked, and again the charioteer explained, "This is illness, my prince. The body breaks down, disease enters, pain comes. No one is exempt." "Even me?" "Even you." The third encounter was with a corpse being carried to cremation. The body still and grey, the mourners weeping behind it. Siddhartha had never seen death, had never even imagined that human beings simply stopped being. What is that? Where are they taking that person? That person has died, my prince. The life has left the body. This is what happens to every living being eventually. To everyone. To everyone. Your father, your wife, your son, you, me. No one who is born escapes death. Siddhartha rode back to the palace in silence. The musicians and dancers were there, the beautiful gardens, the perfect constructed world. But now he could not unsee what he had seen. Every young face would age. Every healthy body would sicken. Everyone he loved would die. And he would die too. The palace was not protection. It was just prettier scenery on the way to the same destination as everyone else. But there was a fourth encounter. Days later, still reeling, Siddhartha saw someone different, a wandering spiritual seeker. Shaved head, simple robes, a peaceful expression that stood in stark contrast to the anxiety Siddhartha now felt constantly. Who is that person? That is someone who has renounced the household life, my prince. Someone who seeks a way beyond aging, sickness, and death. Someone who looks for liberation from suffering. And Siddhartha understood. There were only 2 choices. He could return to the palace and pretend he had not seen what he had seen, live out his life in denial until the things he now knew were coming actually came. Or he could do what that peaceful seeker was doing, face reality directly and search for a way through it rather than around it. That night, Siddhartha left the palace. He kissed his sleeping wife and infant son goodbye, cut his hair, exchanged his royal clothes for simple robes, and walked away from everything his father had built to protect him from the truth. The story does not end there. We know Siddhartha eventually became the Buddha, that he found what he was looking for. But what matters for us is this: the moment he stopped pretending, the moment he let the walls fall and looked directly at impermanence, his real life began. You live in a palace too, though yours does not have 3 buildings and gardens. Your palace is built from busyness that keeps you from thinking about death, from social media feeds that show only curated permanence, from anti-aging creams and procedures that promise you can outrun time. It is built from the stories you tell yourself. That will not happen to me. I have plenty of time. I will deal with that later. Your palace has walls that keep certain thoughts out. The knowledge that your parents are aging and will die, that your own body is already in the process of breaking down, that the relationships you depend on will end either through distance or death. We work very hard to maintain these walls, to keep the 4th messenger visible and the first 3 hidden. But the messengers find you anyway. A diagnosis, a funeral, a birthday that hits differently, a moment when you catch your reflection and do not recognize how you have aged. The walls crack, reality seeps through, and you have Siddhartha's choice: patch the walls and pretend harder, or let them fall completely and see what is actually here. What Siddhartha discovered was not that impermanence is a problem to solve. It was that fighting impermanence is what creates suffering. The palace walls did not protect him from aging, sickness, and death. They just delayed his awareness of them, which meant when awareness came, it arrived as shock and betrayal rather than as simple reality. When you pretend your parents will live forever, their aging feels like a cruel surprise. When you pretend you will always be young and capable, your body's natural changes feel like personal failure. When you pretend relationships last eternally without effort or change, their endings feel like catastrophes. The palace walls do not prevent pain. They prevent you from meeting pain with preparedness, with acceptance, with the kind of grace that comes from looking directly at what is true. The 4th messenger is the crucial part of the story. Siddhartha did not encounter only suffering and then despair. He encountered suffering and then someone who had found peace while fully acknowledging that suffering. Someone who was not pretending, not hiding, not building walls, and yet was not destroyed by reality. Someone who had discovered that you can know about impermanence and still be okay, can look directly at aging and sickness and death and find liberation rather than terror. This is what gets lost when we hear only about Buddhism and suffering. That was the first 3 messengers. The 4th messenger said, "Yes, and there is a way through. You do not have to be either ignorant or destroyed. There is a 3rd option, awake and at peace." What would it mean to let your palace walls fall today? Not in some grand dramatic gesture, but in small acknowledgements of what is true. Your body is aging, not as punishment, not as failure, just as the nature of bodies. The people you love will die, not because life is cruel, but because everything that begins ends. The self you were 10 years ago is already gone, and the self you are now will also change. These are not problems to solve. They are the conditions of existence. And inside those conditions, liberation is possible. Not liberation from impermanence, but liberation from the exhausting work of denying it, from the suffering that comes from demanding permanence in a temporary world. When you stop fighting what is true, energy becomes available for living inside the truth with presence and love, and sometimes even joy. Siddhartha's father built the most beautiful prison in the world, but it was still a prison. Your denial might be more comfortable than awareness, might feel safer than seeing clearly, but it still keeps you from your actual life. The person you are pretending to be, the one who will not age, who will never lose anyone, who has unlimited time, that person does not exist and never did. The person who does exist is temporary, is already in motion toward change, is going to age and sicken and die and lose people and have their heart broken by impermanence over and over. And that person, the real one, deserves to live their real life rather than perform in a palace play. That person deserves the fourth messenger's discovery, that you can be awake and at peace, that you can see clearly and still love, that liberation is not found behind walls but in the courage to let them fall. This is the sixth release, understanding that impermanence is not the enemy but the condition, and that peace comes not from hiding from what changes, but from meeting it without armor, without denial, with the kind of open-eyed presence that makes every moment precious precisely because it will not last forever. The palace offered Siddhartha safety, but the road offered him truth. And truth, it turned out, was what he had been hungry for all along. He walked away to find what does not change, but first he would have to face what always changes, and so would a king who thought he had time to prepare. King Pasenadi ruled the kingdom of Kosala, and like most kings, he spent his days managing territory disputes, tax collection, military strategy, diplomatic relations. He had advisors for everything, protocols for every situation, plans stretching years into the future. He was good at his work, conscientious, always thinking 3 moves ahead. One afternoon he visited the Buddha and asked a question that had been troubling him. "Lord, is there anything that cannot be avoided by wealth, by power, by military strength, by diplomacy, by clever planning?" The Buddha looked at him with the directness he brought to everything. "Imagine this, great king. A reliable messenger comes running from the east and says, 'A great mountain is rolling toward us, crushing everything in its path. Trees, villages, animals, people, all destroyed. Do what you must, while there is still time.'" The king listened, and the Buddha continued. "Then another messenger comes from the west with the same news, a mountain crushing toward you from that direction. Then from the north, then from the south, 4 massive mountains rolling toward you from all 4 directions, destroying all life in their path. What would you do, great king? What should be done when such a terrible destruction is coming? Pasenadi sat quietly for a moment, imagining it. 4 mountains closing in, nowhere to run, no escape possible. Then he said, "Lord, when such terrible destruction is approaching, what else could be done but to live by the teachings? What else but to act rightly, to do what is wholesome, to practice what is good?" The Buddha nodded. "I tell you, great king, those mountains are already rolling toward you. Aging is a mountain crushing toward you from one direction. Sickness is a mountain from another. Death is approaching from a third. And decay, the gradual falling apart of everything you think is solid, comes from the fourth. When these mountains are rolling toward you, what else is there to do but live well right now?" This was not meant to terrify the king, but to clarify him, to cut through the endless postponement, the "I will get to that later," the belief that there is always more time to become who you want to be or do what you know you should do. The mountains are not coming someday. They are already in motion. Pasenadi was not being told anything he did not already know. He had seen people age, had attended funerals, had watched his own body begin to change in small ways that would become big ways. But knowing intellectually that death exists is different from feeling the urgency of mountains closing in from all directions with nowhere to hide. The teaching was not panic and despair because everything ends. The teaching was clarity about what matters when you remember that time is limited. The king had been operating as if he had infinite time to optimize every decision, to plan for every contingency, to eventually get around to living according to his deepest values. The mountain said, "You do not have infinite time, so what are you doing today?" You feel this teaching differently at different stages of life. When you are 20, the mountains seem distant, almost theoretical. When you are 40, you can see them on the horizon. When you are 60, you can feel the ground trembling. But regardless of your age, the mountains are moving, and they do not stop for anyone's plans or protests. The Buddha was not being morbid or pessimistic. He was being practical. If you had a terminal diagnosis and 6 months to live, would you spend those months scrolling social media, avoiding difficult conversations, staying in situations that drain you? Probably not. You would suddenly become very clear about what deserves your attention and what does not. You would stop wasting time on trivial conflicts. You would tell people you love them. You would do the work you came here to do. The mountain teaching says, you do have a terminal diagnosis. Everyone does. You just do not know if you have 6 months or 6 decades, but the diagnosis is the same either way. This life will end, and you do not know when. So what are you waiting for? This is not the same as the anxiety-driven productivity culture that says you must optimize every moment, that rest is wasted time. The mountains do not care about your productivity. They care about whether you are living in alignment with what you actually value, whether you are being the person you want to be. For some people, the mountain teaching means finally writing the book. For others, it means quitting the job that is killing them slowly. For others still, it means calling their mother more often, or apologizing for something from years ago, or simply sitting in the garden and watching the light change. The mountains do not prescribe what matters. They just clarify that you need to know what matters and then actually do it. King Pasenadi had been living as if he could delay everything important until after he handled the urgent. After this border dispute, after this harvest, after this diplomatic mission, then he would attend to his practice, his relationships, his inner life. But there is always another border dispute, another harvest, another mission. The urgent never runs out. What runs out is time. The teaching shifted something in him, not his external life necessarily. He still had a kingdom to run, responsibilities he could not abandon. But his relationship to those responsibilities changed. He stopped treating them as obstacles between him and his real life and started treating his real life as how he showed up for those responsibilities right now, today, with the awareness that the mountains were already moving. This creates a particular kind of motivation that is not anxiety-based. Anxiety says, everything is urgent, you are always behind, you will never do enough. Mountain awareness says, time is limited, which makes now precious, which means what you do today actually matters. One creates panic, the other creates presence. Think about how you would live if you knew you had exactly 1 year left. What would you stop doing? What would you start doing? Who would you forgive? What conversations would you have? Now notice, you do not actually know that you have more than a year. The mountains are not on your schedule. They arrive when they arrive. So why are you living as if you have infinite time to get to the things that matter? This is not meant to create fear, but to cut through the fog of postponement that keeps you from your actual life. How many years have you spent planning to start the thing, preparing to have the conversation, waiting to become ready? The mountain teaching says, you are as ready as you will ever be. The moment is now, and pretending you have unlimited time is the real danger. Pasenadi could have responded to the teaching with paralysis or despair. Instead, he responded with clarification. If the mountains are coming and nothing can stop them, then what actually matters is how he lives between now and when they arrive. Not what he accomplishes, not what he accumulates, but how he shows up, how he treats people, whether he lives according to his values or in contradiction to them. The Buddha taught that remembering death is not morbid but liberating. It frees you from the tyranny of the trivial, from wasting energy on things that will not matter when the mountains arrive. It helps you distinguish between what you do because you think you should and what you do because it genuinely aligns with who you are and what you value. Sometimes the mountains clarify that you need to leave. Sometimes they clarify that you need to stay, but show up differently. Sometimes they clarify that the problem is not the external situation, but your internal story about it. But they always clarify something if you let them. Hasanadi lived differently after that conversation. Not radically different in external ways. He was still king, still had the same duties. But internally, he stopped postponing his actual life until after he handled one more thing. He started treating each interaction, each decision, each moment as if it mattered, because he understood that it did. The mountains were coming. They had always been coming, and there was no retirement from human existence where he could finally relax and be himself. Now was the time. Now was always the time. This is the 7th release. Understanding that urgency without panic is possible when you remember that time is limited and therefore precious. The mountains are not meant to terrify you into frantic activity or paralyze you with existential dread. They are meant to clarify what deserves your attention and what does not, to help you live today as if it matters, because it does. You do not know when the mountains will arrive, but you know they are already in motion, and the only question is what you will do with the time between now and then. That clarity about time running short creates readiness, and for one young seeker, readiness met teaching in a way that changed everything. Upatissa was 20 years old and already exhausted by spiritual seeking. He and his closest friend Kolita had spent years studying with the best teachers they could find, practicing every technique, mastering every teaching. They had memorized scriptures, performed rituals, debated philosophy with scholars who seemed to know everything, and yet something remained unsatisfied, some question unanswered, some peace they had not found. They had made a pact years earlier. Whichever of them first discovered the deathless, the path to true liberation, would immediately tell the other. They were not in competition, but in collaboration, two people genuinely seeking truth and willing to share it when found. So Upatissa kept practicing, kept studying, kept searching, always with a corner of his attention alert for that breakthrough moment. One morning, in the city of Rajagaha, Upatissa saw a monk he did not recognize walking through the streets. There was something different about this monk. Not his robes, which were simple like any monk's robes. Not his appearance, which was unremarkable. But the way he walked, the quality of his presence, the sense that he was completely settled in himself, in a way Upatissa had never seen in anyone. Upatissa followed him for a while, watching. The monk's gaze was soft but clear, not grasping at what he saw, not pushing it away, just receiving each moment with steady attention. His steps were even, unhurried, as if he had nowhere to be and was already exactly where he needed to be. There was no performance in it, no spiritual posturing, just a human being walking through a city with complete presence. Finally, Upatissa approached and asked, "Friend, who is your teacher? What teaching do you follow?" There is something about you that is different from other spiritual practitioners I have met. The monk smiled slightly and said, "My teacher is the ascetic Gautama, the awakened one. I am still new to the training and cannot teach much. I am just a beginner." But Upatissa pressed, "Please, friend, whatever you can share, even a little. I have been seeking for years and have not found what I am looking for. Even a single phrase from your teacher's teaching would help." The monk, whose name was Assaji, paused and then spoke 4 lines that would change not only Upatissa's life, but the entire trajectory of the Buddhist tradition. Of things that arise from a cause, the Tathagata has told the cause, and also their cessation. This is the teaching of the great ascetic. 4 lines. One simple statement about causation, not elaborate philosophy, not complex meditation instructions, not dramatic revelations about the nature of reality. Just, things arise from causes, and when you understand the causes, you can understand how they cease. Upatissa stood completely still, as something fundamental shifted in his understanding. His whole life he had been looking for the thing that did not depend on causes, the eternal, unchanging reality beneath the flux of experience. But what if that was the wrong question? What if liberation was not found by discovering some permanent essence, but by understanding the temporary nature of everything, the way all phenomena arise and pass based on conditions? In that moment, standing on a street in Rajagaha, listening to a monk who claimed to be a beginner, Upatissa became what the tradition calls a stream enterer, someone who has glimpsed the nature of reality clearly enough that they will inevitably reach full awakening. Not because he understood every detail, not because he had practiced for decades, but because, in his prepared mind, those 4 lines landed with the force of recognition. He thanked Assaji, bowed deeply, and immediately went to find Kolita to fulfill their pact. When Kolita saw Upatissa's face, he knew before any words were spoken, "You have found it." Upatissa shared the 4 lines, and Kolita experienced the same shift, the same sudden clarity. They gathered the 250 spiritual seekers who had been studying with them and said, "We are going to follow the ascetic Gautama. Anyone who wishes to come with us is welcome." All 250 came. When they arrived at the Buddha's monastery, the Buddha looked up and said to his monks, "These 2 friends who are approaching will become my chief disciples, the most distinguished among my followers." And so they did. Upatissa became known as Shariputra, the monk famous for his wisdom. Kolita became Moggallana, the monk famous for his psychic powers. This story is not about the content of those 4 lines, though they point to something true and important. This story is about readiness. Why did 4 simple lines unlock complete transformation for Shariputra when he had heard thousands of elaborate teachings before? Because those years of seeking had prepared the ground. Because his mind was no longer cluttered with the need to be right or the fear of being wrong. Because he was genuinely open, rather than defending a position. You know how this works if you have ever had the experience of reading a book for the second time and discovering an entirely different book than the one you read before. The words did not change. You changed. The first time you read it, you were not ready to see what was there. The second time, life had prepared you, and the same words revealed depths you could not previously access. Or you know this, if someone has given you advice that made no sense at the time, and then years later, you found yourself in a situation where suddenly that advice was the only thing that made sense. The advice was always true, but you were not always ready to hear it. Shariputra's instant awakening was not luck or grace arbitrarily bestowed. It was the result of years of preparation, meeting the exact teaching at the exact moment he was capable of receiving it. The readiness came first. The teaching came second. And when readiness meets teaching, transformation happens not as a long, slow process, but as immediate recognition. This is why the same teaching affects different people differently. One person hears about impermanence, and it rolls off them like water off stone. Another person hears the same teaching, and their entire worldview reorganizes around it. The difference is not the teaching. The difference is the soil the teaching falls into. What prepares the soil? For Shariputra, it was years of sincere seeking, years of trying different practices and finding them incomplete, years of building a genuine humility about his own understanding. By the time he met Asaji, he was not trying to prove anything or defend any position. He was simply open to truth wherever he found it, even from a monk who called himself a beginner. For you, the preparation might look different. Maybe it is suffering that has worn down your resistance to seeing clearly. Maybe it is a series of failures that have made you question assumptions you thought were unquestionable. Maybe it is years of therapy or meditation, or simply living that have gradually made you less defended and more available to reality as it is. But you know when the soil is ready because you stop needing the teaching to say what you want to hear and start being able to hear what the teaching actually says. You stop filtering everything through the question, does this confirm what I already believe? And start asking, is this true? You stop protecting your existing understanding and start being genuinely curious about what you might have missed. Shariputra did not become a stream enterer because the 4 lines were magic words. He became a stream enterer because he was ready to become a stream enterer, and the 4 lines were the catalyst that activated a transformation already prepared for. The teaching was the match. His readiness was the kindling. Both were necessary. This matters because many people are waiting for the perfect teaching, the perfect teacher, the perfect technique that will finally make everything click. They go from book to book, workshop to workshop, teacher to teacher, always looking for the magic formula. But the teaching you need might be one you have already heard 10 times. What you are actually waiting for is not a new teaching, but your own readiness to hear it. How do you prepare the soil? By being honest about what you do not know instead of pretending to know more than you do. By admitting when practices are not working instead of performing spiritual progress. By staying curious instead of becoming certain. By remaining genuinely open to being wrong about fundamental things. Shariputra could have dismissed Assaji. Here was a monk who admitted he was a beginner, who could only share 4 lines of teaching, who had nothing elaborate or impressive to offer. Shariputra had studied with renowned teachers, had access to sophisticated philosophical systems, had spent years in advanced practices. But he listened anyway, without hierarchy, without dismissal, without the assumption that he already knew better. That quality of listening, open, humble, genuinely receptive, is what made the 4 lines land. If he had been defending his existing understanding, if he had been comparing this teaching to others he had learned, if he had been evaluating Assaji's qualifications before deciding whether to take the word seriously, the moment would have passed. But he listened, the way soil receives seeds, without judgment, just open. This is the 8th release, understanding that transformation happens not when you find the perfect teaching, but when you become ready to hear what has always been available. The teachings are already here, have been here for centuries, are being spoken and written and shared constantly. What is rare is not the teaching, but the readiness to receive it, the quality of openness that allows truth to land without resistance, without deflection, without the mind immediately translating it into something more comfortable or familiar. Prepare the soil of your attention through honesty, through humility, through genuine curiosity, and when the teaching arrives, even in 4 simple lines from someone claiming to be a beginner, you will recognize it immediately as the thing you have been seeking all along. But how rare is it that the soil becomes ready, that readiness and teaching meet at precisely the right moment. The Buddha once gathered his monks and asked them to imagine something almost absurdly specific. Picture the entire earth covered by a vast ocean. He said, "At the bottom of this ocean lives a blind turtle. This turtle is ancient and slow, and it surfaces to breathe only once every 100 years. Now imagine," the Buddha continued, "that floating somewhere on the surface of this enormous ocean is a single wooden yoke, the kind used to harness oxen, with one hole in the center. The wind and currents push this yoke randomly across the water, never staying in one place, drifting east and west, north and south without pattern or predictability." The Buddha looked at his monks and asked, "What do you think? When that blind turtle surfaces once every 100 years, what are the chances its head will rise up precisely through the hole in that wandering yoke?" The monks laughed at the absurdity of the question. One of them answered, "Lord, it would be extraordinarily rare. The ocean is vast, the yoke is small and constantly moving, and the turtle is blind and surfaces so infrequently. The chances would be nearly impossible." Just so, the Buddha said. And yet I tell you, it is even more rare than that to be born as a human being. The teaching landed like a stone in still water, ripples spreading through the assembly. These monks had given up everything to practice: their homes, their families, their comfortable lives. They had made the extraordinary choice to dedicate themselves entirely to awakening. And yet the Buddha was telling them that simply being born human, simply having this body and this mind and this brief window of existence was already more precious than the rarest lottery win imaginable. Why does this matter? Because we live as if we have infinite chances, infinite time, as if being born human is ordinary and unremarkable instead of statistically miraculous. We scroll through our days half-present, postponing what matters, treating this life like a rehearsal for some future life where we will finally pay attention. Think about what had to happen for you to exist right now. Your parents had to meet among billions of people on Earth. Their parents had to meet, going back through generations, an unbroken chain of meetings and survivals and births that stretches back to the beginning of human existence. One different choice by one ancestor 1,000 years ago, and you would not be here. Beyond that, you had to be born human rather than one of the countless other life forms on this planet. You had to be born with enough cognitive capacity to understand language, to reflect on your experience, to choose how you respond to what happens. You had to be born in a time and place where teachings about liberation are available, where you have enough freedom and resources to actually consider questions deeper than immediate survival. The blind turtle teaching is not meant to make you feel lucky in a generic, Hallmark card kind of way. It is meant to create a specific urgency about how you use this improbable life. If you truly grasped how rare this is, how easily you might never have existed at all, how this chance will not come around again after you die, would you spend today the way you are planning to spend it? The turtle surfaces once every 100 years. You get one human life, maybe 70 or 80 years if you are fortunate, and much of that will be spent in childhood learning basic skills, in old age declining, in sleep resting. The actual window where you have full capacity and genuine freedom to practice, to love, to create, to wake up, that window is shockingly small. And yet, how much of that window do you waste waiting for conditions to be perfect? Waiting until you have more money, more time, more energy, more certainty about which path to take. Waiting until the kids are grown, until you retire, until you finally figure out what you are supposed to be doing with your life. Meanwhile, the turtle has surfaced. Its head is above water, and you are spending these precious moments scrolling, worrying, rehearsing conversations that will never happen, holding grudges about things that no longer matter. The Buddha was not trying to induce guilt or shame with this teaching. He was trying to wake people up to the preciousness of what they already have before they waste it entirely. You do not need different circumstances to begin practicing. to start living according to your values, to stop postponing your actual life. You need to recognize that these are already the circumstances. This is already the life, and the turtle is already at the surface. Consider what it means that you can read these words right now. You have eyes that work, a mind that can process meaning, enough education to decode written language, enough leisure to spend time thinking about questions beyond survival. Billions of humans throughout history did not have these conditions. Billions alive right now do not have them. You hit the lottery of being born in circumstances where liberation is not just theoretically possible but practically accessible. And what are you doing with that access? The yoke drifts randomly across the infinite ocean. The conditions for awakening do not appear reliably or predictably. You happen to be born into a moment where the teachings exist, where you have freedom to explore them, where your basic needs are met enough that you can turn attention to deeper questions. This is not guaranteed to last. Political situations change. Personal circumstances shift. Bodies decline. Mental capacity fades. The yoke might drift away before you surface again. This creates a particular quality of urgency that is different from anxiety. Anxiety says, you are running out of time and failing and nothing you do is enough. Gratitude urgency says, you have this moment, which is astonishing and precious, so do not waste it on things that do not matter. One paralyzes, the other galvanizes. When you truly feel the rarity of human birth, certain choices become easier. The petty argument with your partner, is this how you want to spend your blind turtle surfacing moment? The hours lost to resentment about something that happened years ago, is this worthy of this rare and precious life? The postponement of important conversations, meaningful work, genuine presence with people you love, can you afford to wait when the turtle only surfaces once? The teaching asks you to take seriously the fact that you will not always be here, that this specific configuration of consciousness and body and circumstance is temporary and will dissolve, and that right now, in this moment, you have capacities and opportunities that are genuinely rare. Not rare compared to other humans you know, but rare in the scope of all possible existence across all time. A bacteria does not contemplate the nature of suffering. An insect does not choose to forgive. Most animals do not have the cognitive architecture to recognize their own patterns and intentionally change them. But you do. You can notice when you are being petty and choose generosity instead. You can see your own defensive patterns and work to soften them. You can recognize suffering in yourself and others and respond with compassion rather than reactivity. This capacity is the hole in the yoke, and you have surfaced right through it. So what now? The turtle is at the surface, the yoke is right there, and you have maybe a few decades before you sink back down into the depths. The Buddha is not suggesting you panic or force yourself into some exhausting spiritual marathon. He is suggesting you pay attention, that you stop sleepwalking through the one life you have, that you recognize extraordinary circumstances when you are in them rather than only in retrospect. This means making choices today that reflect the preciousness of today. Not someday, when you have more time or better conditions or a clearer sense of purpose, but today, with exactly the time and conditions and clarity you have right now. The blind turtle did not wait for perfect visibility or calm seas or a guarantee that the yoke would be exactly overhead. It surfaced when it surfaced, and either the yoke was there or it was not. For you, the yoke is here. You are alive. You are conscious. You have access to teachings about how to live with more wisdom and less suffering, and you have at least this moment to do something with all of that. Tomorrow is not guaranteed. Next year is not promised. But right now, you have what the turtle spent 100 years submerged to reach: air, light, and the chance to see clearly before diving back down. The monks who heard this teaching were already living as if their human birth mattered. They had given up ordinary life to train full-time in awakening. But even they needed the reminder. This is rare, this is precious. Do not take it for granted even for a moment. If they needed that reminder, how much more do we need it? We who have the same rare circumstances, but fill them with distraction and postponement and the illusion that there will always be more time. This is the 9th release, understanding that being born human is not ordinary or guaranteed, and that the conditions allowing for liberation are even more rare than human birth itself. You surface through the yoke, not through your own effort, but through incomprehensible chance. What you do with that chance is the only thing you actually control. The turtle will descend again. That is certain. The question is whether you used your time at the surface to breathe deeply, to see clearly, to live as if this moment matters, because it does, because it is all you ever actually have, and because it is far more precious than you have been treating it. The Buddha knew this preciousness, and yet even he wondered whether anyone else would see it, whether sharing what he found was worth the effort. After 6 years of extreme practice, after finally sitting beneath the Bodhi tree and breaking through to complete awakening, the Buddha sat in the silence of his liberation for 7 weeks. He had found what he had been seeking, the end of suffering, the understanding of how craving creates bondage and how its cessation creates freedom. He had the answer to the question that had driven him from the palace through years of ascetic practice to this moment of complete clarity. And then he thought, who would understand this? The teaching he had discovered was subtle, profound, difficult to see. It went against every natural instinct, the instinct to grasp at pleasure, to push away pain, to believe in a permanent self that needs protecting and defending. He had spent years preparing his mind to see it, and even then the breakthrough had required extraordinary effort and determination. How could he possibly communicate this to people who were caught in the thick of their desires and fears, who had no interest in questioning their most basic assumptions about existence? The texts say that the Buddha reflected, "This truth I have realized is deep, hard to see, hard to understand, peaceful and sublime, beyond the sphere of reasoning, subtle, comprehensible only to the wise. But people are attached to sensual pleasures. They delight in attachment. They enjoy attachment. For such people, this truth will be difficult to see. So he decided not to teach, not out of stinginess or lack of compassion, but out of a realistic assessment that the effort would be wasted, that no one would understand, that he would be trying to explain color to people born blind, or music to people born deaf. Why exhaust himself trying to communicate the incommunicable? Better to remain in the peace of his own liberation and let the world continue as it was. This moment of doubt is rarely talked about, but it is crucial. Even the Buddha, freshly enlightened, experienced the thought, "My wisdom will not help anyone. People will not understand. Teaching is futile." If he felt that, how much more do we feel it when we have something true to offer, but doubt whether anyone will receive it? At this moment of the Buddha's hesitation, the texts say that Brahma Sahampati, a divine being, a god in the cosmology of ancient India, appeared before him. Brahma had been watching the whole drama of the Buddha's journey, and now, seeing that the Buddha might not teach, he was horrified. Here was someone who had found the way out of suffering, and he was about to keep it to himself because he assumed no one would understand. Brahma bowed before the Buddha and said, "Lord, please teach. There are beings with little dust in their eyes who are falling away through not hearing the teaching. There will be those who will understand." The Buddha looked at the world with what the texts call the eye of a Buddha, a clear perception that sees things as they actually are. And what he saw was that Brahma was right. Not everyone was drowning in attachment. Some people had only a little dust in their eyes. They were close to seeing clearly. They just needed someone to articulate what they were already beginning to intuit. Some people were genuinely ready to hear, genuinely capable of understanding, genuinely prepared to put the teaching into practice. So the Buddha agreed to teach, not because he believed everyone would understand. That was never going to be true. But because some people would understand, and those people deserved to hear what he had discovered. Their liberation mattered, even if it was not universal, even if many others would ignore or reject the teaching entirely. This story is about the Buddha, but it is also about you, about every time you have held back from sharing something true because you assumed no one would care or understand, about every time you have kept silent about your experience because speaking seemed futile, about every time you have thought, what difference would it make? Who would listen? Why bother? Maybe you have insight about how your workplace could function better, but you do not speak up because you assume management will not listen. Maybe you understand something about parenting or relationships or healing that could help others, but you keep it to yourself because you think, who am I to teach anyone? Maybe you have survived something difficult and learned something valuable in the process, but you do not share your story because you believe no one wants to hear about pain or struggle. The Buddha's hesitation gives you permission to acknowledge that yes, many people will not understand, will not care, will not be ready to hear what you have to offer. That is true and realistic. But Brahma's request reminds you there are beings with little dust in their eyes. There are people who are right on the edge of understanding, who just need someone to name what they are experiencing, who are genuinely ready to receive what you have learned. You do not have to reach everyone. You do not have to convince the unconvincible or wake up people who are determined to stay asleep. But there are some, maybe just a few, maybe more than you think, who are ready, who are waiting, who need exactly what you know, in exactly the way you know how to share it. And they matter enough to make the effort worthwhile. This is different from the contemporary pressure to have a platform, to build an audience, to monetize your knowledge, or perform your expertise. The Buddha was not trying to become an influencer or build a following. He was responding to the genuine need of people who were ready to learn, sharing what was true because it was true, and because someone needed to hear it. The question is not, how can I reach millions of people? But, are there a few people who are ready? And the answer is almost always yes. In your family, in your workplace, in your community, in the random interactions you have throughout your day, there are people with less dust in their eyes than they had yesterday. People who are becoming ready to see something they could not see before. People who would benefit from hearing what you have learned. Brahma's request also teaches something about doubt. The Buddha's hesitation was not weakness or failure. It was a realistic assessment of how difficult communication is, how rare deep understanding is, how easy it is for truth to be misunderstood or rejected. His doubt was not wrong. It just was not the whole picture. You will doubt whether your wisdom matters. You will question whether speaking up makes any difference. You will wonder if staying silent is easier and equally effective. These doubts are natural and in some ways accurate. Yes, many people will not understand. Yes, your words will not change everything. Yes, silence is often easier. But the doubt is not the end of the conversation. After the doubt comes the question Brahma poses, but what about those with little dust in their eyes? What about the ones who are ready? Do they not deserve to hear? And when you ask that question honestly, the answer shifts from no one will understand to some people will understand, and that is enough. The Buddha spent the next 45 years teaching. Not everyone who heard him became enlightened. Many rejected his teaching outright. Some misunderstood it completely. Some practiced for years and made minimal progress. But some, like Shariputra, like Moggallana, like thousands of monks and nuns and lay people across generations, heard the teaching and were transformed by it. The ones with little dust in their eyes did exist, and they received exactly what they needed. Your experience, your understanding, your hard-won wisdom from years of living and struggling and learning someone needs it. Not everyone, not even most people, but someone whose eyes are almost clear, who is right on the edge of seeing what you see, who is waiting for someone to name the thing they are experiencing so they know they are not alone and not crazy. The question is whether you will let your doubt about reaching everyone prevent you from reaching the few who are actually ready. Whether you will stay silent because most people will not understand or speak anyway because some people will. Whether you will hoard your wisdom because it seems futile to share or offer it freely to whoever has ears to hear. Brahma's request was not, make everyone understand. It was teach for the sake of those who are ready. The Buddha could not enlighten everyone, but he could make the teaching available so that those who were prepared to receive it would have access to it. That was enough. That is always enough. This is the 10th release. Understanding that your wisdom does not have to reach everyone to matter, that there are people with little dust in their eyes who are ready to hear what you have learned, and that your doubt about whether teaching makes a difference should not prevent you from offering what is true to those who are genuinely prepared to receive it. The Buddha almost stayed silent. He almost let his realistic assessment of human limitation keep him from sharing what he knew. But Brahma reminded him, the ready ones exist. They are waiting. They deserve to hear. And reaching them is worth the effort, even if many others will not understand. Your wisdom is like that too, not for everyone, but essential for someone, and that someone's readiness makes your voice necessary. Yet once you decide to offer what you know, you will face another choice between quick comfort and lasting peace, between what satisfies immediately and what sustains indefinitely. A young monk rose before dawn to bathe in the river, as was his custom. The water was cold and clear, the morning air still cool, the world quiet except for birds beginning their first songs. He washed mindfully, present with each sensation, not rushing, not lost in thought, just bathing. As he prepared to leave the river, a goddess appeared before him. She was extraordinarily beautiful, radiant, with an otherworldly light, and she smiled at him with an invitation that was unmistakable. "Young monk," she said, her voice like music, "you are wasting your youth. Look at you, young, healthy, full of vitality, and what are you doing with this precious time? Sitting in meditation, eating one meal a day, sleeping on the ground, renouncing all pleasure. I can offer you everything you are denying yourself: sensual delight, luxury, comfort, all the pleasures your body was made to experience. Why choose hardship when happiness is available right now?" The monk looked at her without agitation, without temptation, without even needing to resist. He simply replied, "I have abandoned dangerous pleasures for the sake of pleasure that is safe." You praise sensual pleasure, goddess, but I do not delight in it. I have found joy in the Dhamma, in the teaching, and that joy has dismantled craving entirely. The goddess vanished, her offering rejected, her power useless against someone who genuinely preferred what he had found to what she was selling. The monk continued with his day, unbothered, clear, at peace, in a way the goddess could not touch or take away. This story appears in the texts as an illustration of renunciation, of monastic virtue, of resisting temptation, but it is actually about something more fundamental: the difference between pleasure that costs you and peace that sustains you. The difference between chasing satisfaction that always leaves you wanting more and resting in contentment that does not depend on getting anything. The goddess was not lying. Sensual pleasure is real. Good food tastes good. Physical intimacy feels good. Comfort and luxury provide genuine enjoyment. She was not offering fake happiness or illusion. She was offering actual pleasure, the kind the body responds to, the kind that has kept humans pursuing it for thousands of years. But the monk understood something the goddess did not acknowledge. Those pleasures come with a cost, not a moral cost, not punishment from the universe, but a structural cost built into their nature. They require constant maintenance, constant pursuit, constant defense against their inevitable ending. They create dependency, craving, the sense that you need them to be okay. And when you need something to be okay, you are no longer free. He called them dangerous pleasures, not because they are evil, but because they are unstable foundations. Build your happiness on them, and you are building on sand that shifts with every tide of circumstance. The delicious meal ends, and you are hungry again. The passionate relationship cools or ends, and you are alone again. The beautiful body ages, and you are confronted with loss. None of this makes pleasure wrong, but it does make it unreliable as a basis for lasting peace. What the monk had found instead was what he called safe pleasure, not in the sense of risk-free, but in the sense of not creating more suffering in its wake. The joy that comes from understanding how things actually work, from living in alignment with reality rather than in constant tension with it, from not needing anything to be different than it is in order to be at peace. This is a hard teaching for a culture built entirely on the pursuit of pleasure and the avoidance of pain. We are taught from birth that happiness means getting what you want, that the good life means maximizing pleasure and minimizing discomfort. Entire industries exist to sell us the next thing that will finally make us happy: the right partner, the right body, the right house, the right experience. And we keep buying, keep pursuing, keep believing that this next thing will be the one that finally satisfies. But it never quite does it? The satisfaction is real but temporary, the pleasure genuine but fleeting, and then you are back to wanting, back to seeking, back to the sense that something is missing, and if you could just get that one thing, then you would finally be okay. The monk was not denying that sensual pleasure feels good. He was recognizing that building your life around chasing it creates a particular kind of suffering, the suffering of always wanting more, always fearing loss, always dependent on conditions outside your control to determine whether you are happy or miserable. He had tried that approach and found it exhausting. What he discovered instead was that when you stop making happiness conditional on getting specific pleasures, a different kind of contentment becomes available. Not the spike of excitement when you get what you want, but the steady baseline of being okay, regardless of what you get or do not get. Not needing the world to arrange itself perfectly for you to be at peace, but being at peace with the world as it actually is. This does not mean becoming numb or indifferent or joyless. The monk still experienced pleasure, the cold water on his skin, the beauty of dawn, the satisfaction of a mind at rest. But he was not dependent on those pleasures, not driven by them, not afraid of their absence. They arose when conditions were right, and passed when conditions changed, and neither the arising nor the passing determined his fundamental state of being. The goddess represented the voice that still lives in all of us, the voice that says, "You are missing out. You could have more pleasure, more comfort, more excitement. Why deny yourself? Why choose discipline when indulgence is available? Why sit with difficulty when you could escape into distraction?" That voice is not evil or wrong. It is trying to help, trying to protect you from discomfort, trying to get you what it thinks you need. But the monk's response teaches that sometimes what the voice is offering, while genuine, is not actually what you most deeply want. Sometimes the pleasure being offered would cost you the peace you have been cultivating. Sometimes saying yes to immediate gratification means saying no to something more valuable that requires patience and discipline to develop. You know this if you have ever chosen to stay with difficult feelings instead of numbing them with food or alcohol or shopping or screens. The numbing would have felt good immediately, would have provided real relief, would have worked in the short term. But staying with the difficulty, learning to be present with discomfort without needing to escape it, develops a capacity that no amount of pleasure-seeking ever could, the capacity to be okay, even when things are not okay, to have peace that does not depend on circumstances being pleasant. The monk had cultivated this capacity to the point where the goddess's offer genuinely did not appeal to him, not because he was suppressing desire or white-knuckling his way through temptation, but because he had tasted something better and recognized sensual pleasure for what it was, real but limited, enjoyable but unreliable, available but not necessary for his well-being. This is what the modern self-care movement often misses when it prescribes bubble baths and chocolate as the answer to stress. Those things are fine, can be genuinely pleasant, might provide temporary relief. But they do not address the deeper issue, the way we have made our peace conditional on getting certain pleasures and avoiding certain pains, the way we have become dependent on external circumstances to determine our internal state. Real self-care, the kind that actually heals anxiety and stress rather than just temporarily covering it up, looks more like what the monk was doing, waking early to practice before the world makes demands. sitting with discomfort instead of immediately reaching for comfort, developing the capacity to be present with whatever arises, pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral, without needing it to be different, building happiness on the foundation of understanding and acceptance rather than on the shifting sand of getting what you want. The goddess offered immediate pleasure, and the monk chose lasting peace, not because pleasure is bad, but because he had learned the difference between satisfaction that depends on conditions and contentment that does not. Not because he was afraid of pleasure, but because he was no longer interested in the particular suffering that comes from needing it. You face this choice constantly, though rarely as dramatically as a goddess appearing at dawn. The choice between the quick fix and the sustainable solution, between what feels good now and what serves you long term, between chasing the next thing and resting in what is. Neither choice is wrong, but they lead to different destinations. One keeps you dependent and seeking. The other develops independence and peace. This is the 11th release, understanding that some pleasures cost you more than they give you, and that real happiness comes not from getting everything you want, but from no longer needing everything you want in order to be okay. The goddess will always be there offering shortcuts to satisfaction, and sometimes you will take them, and that is fine. But know that there is another option, the patient work of developing peace that does not depend on pleasures arriving or pains departing, contentment that remains stable regardless of what the goddess is selling, freedom that comes not from getting everything, but from needing nothing you do not already have. That peace can arrive at any moment, can land even when time has nearly run out, can transform even final hours into doorways. Anathapindika lay dying in his home in Savatthi, and he knew his time was measured in days, perhaps hours. He had been one of the Buddha's most devoted supporters for decades, the man who purchased the Jetavana monastery and donated it to the Sangha, who fed monks daily, who never missed an opportunity to practice generosity. He had lived a full lay life, managing businesses, raising a family, engaging with the world, while maintaining his commitment to the teachings as deeply as his circumstances allowed. Now his body was failing, and the pain was considerable. He sent word to the monastery asking if Shariputra and Ananda might visit him. When they arrived, they found him lucid, but clearly suffering, his breath shallow, his body wasting away. Shariputra sat beside the bed and asked how he was doing. Anathapindika admitted the truth. "Venerable Sir, my painful feelings are increasing, not subsiding. They grow stronger, not weaker. I feel my life force leaving." What happened next was extraordinary. Shariputra began to teach him meditation instructions that Anathapindika had never heard before, profound practices usually reserved for monks in intensive training. Instructions about not identifying with the six sense bases, about the nature of consciousness, about releasing attachment to perception itself, about the unconditioned reality beyond all constructed experience. He guided Anathapindika through a systematic release of everything he had been clinging to, without even knowing he was clinging. Not just obvious attachments like possessions or relationships, but subtle ones, attachment to seeing, to hearing, to consciousness itself, to the very sense of being someone who experiences. Layer after layer of identity and grasping revealed and released, all while Anathapindika lay dying in physical pain. As Shariputra spoke, something shifted in Anathapindika's experience. The pain did not disappear, but his relationship to it changed fundamentally. He was no longer the person to whom this pain was happening, being victimized by it, needing it to stop. He was simply awareness within which pain was arising and passing, like everything else, arises and passes. When Shariputra finished teaching, Anathapindika was weeping, not from pain or fear or sadness about dying, but from a kind of overwhelmed gratitude. Through his tears, he said, "Venerable Shariputra, I have been a follower of the Buddha for many years. I have listened to countless teachings, supported the Sangha in every way I could, practiced as fully as a householder can practice. But never, in all that time, have I heard a teaching as profound and liberating as what you just shared. Why have lay people not been taught this before?" Shariputra replied gently, "Householder, such deep teachings are not usually given to lay people dressed in white. They are taught to those who have gone forth into homelessness." Anathapindika, even from his deathbed, even in his gratitude, pushed back with clarity, "Venerable Sir, please do not think that way. There are people living as householders who have little dust in their eyes, who would understand these teachings, who would benefit from them, who are capable of the deepest practice, even while living in the world. Do not withhold the profound teachings from lay people. Some of us are ready." Shortly after this exchange, Anathapindika died. The texts say he was reborn in a heavenly realm. But what matters more is this: he died having received exactly what he needed, at exactly the moment he needed it, having touched a depth of understanding that transformed his final hours from suffering into liberation. This story breaks open several assumptions we carry about timing and readiness and who deserves access to the deepest teachings. First, it confronts the belief that it is ever too late to learn something profound, to have a breakthrough, to touch real freedom. Anathapindika was literally dying. If anyone had an excuse to say, "Well, there is no point now," it was him. But the teaching found him anyway, landed anyway, transformed his experience anyway. How many times have you thought, "I am too old to start that now," or "I should have learned this decades ago," or "What is the point when I have so little time left?" Anathapindika teaches that the point is the transformation itself, the understanding itself, the freedom itself, not what you will do with it afterward, or how much time you have to apply it. The teaching has value in this moment, for this moment, regardless of how many moments follow. Second, The story challenges the gatekeeping impulse that says certain teachings are only for certain people, that you need special credentials or circumstances to access the deepest wisdom. Shariputra genuinely believed he was being appropriate by withholding these teachings from lay people. He was following convention, protecting what was considered advanced material, making reasonable assumptions about who was ready for what. But Anathapindika, even dying, had the clarity to say, that assumption is wrong. Some householders are ready. Some people living ordinary lives, working jobs, raising families, paying bills, have little dust in their eyes and would benefit from the teachings you think are too advanced for them. Do not decide for them what they can handle or understand. This matters now because there is still a tendency to believe that deep spiritual practice requires monastic life, that real transformation is only available to people who can dedicate themselves full-time, that if you have responsibilities in the world, you should settle for beginner-level teachings and leave the profound stuff to the renunciants. Anathapindika's deathbed challenge says, no, do not make that assumption. Do not withhold depth from people based on their life circumstances. Third, the story reveals that sometimes the deepest teachings land most powerfully when the stakes are highest, when you cannot postpone or theorize or make it abstract. Anathapindika did not have the luxury of thinking, I will practice this later, when I have more time. He was dying right now. The teaching had to work right now, or not at all. And maybe that urgency, that inability to delay, created the conditions for the teaching to penetrate more deeply than it might have decades earlier, when he still thought he had infinite time. You do not have to be on your literal deathbed to recognize this dynamic. Any crisis, any breakdown, any moment when your usual strategies stop working, creates an opening for teachings that might otherwise bounce off your defended consciousness. When you are truly suffering, when the stakes are real, when you cannot pretend anymore, that is often when you are most ready to hear what you need to hear. The teaching Shariputra gave was about releasing identification with everything you think you are. Your seeing, your hearing, your thinking, your sense of being a self having experiences. Normally that sounds theoretical, philosophical, interesting maybe, but not urgent. But when you are dying, when your body is failing, when the self you have been maintaining is clearly about to dissolve whether you want it to or not, suddenly releasing identification is not theoretical. It is the most practical thing you could possibly learn. Anathapindika wept not because he was sad, but because he was grateful that such teachings existed, that such freedom was possible, that even at the very end, someone was willing to show him the deepest truth. His tears were relief. Relief that he did not have to die clutching and afraid, that there was a way to meet death with openness rather than resistance, that the teachings went all the way down to the bottom and could meet him even here. This is what makes his final words so powerful. Do not withhold the profound teachings. He was not asking for preferential treatment or complaining that he should have received this earlier. He was advocating for everyone who comes after him, everyone who lives in the world, but has little dust in their eyes, everyone who is ready for depth, but might be assumed not ready because of their circumstances. The texts do not say whether Shariputra changed his approach after this conversation, whether he started teaching householders differently. But the story itself has taught generations of practitioners that profound wisdom is not the exclusive property of monastics, that readiness is not determined by robes or retreat schedules, that the teachings should be available to anyone whose eyes are clear enough to see them. What teaching have you been withholding from yourself, deciding you are not ready for, assuming is too advanced or too deep for someone in your circumstances? What practice have you postponed until you have more time, more space, fewer responsibilities? What depth have you avoided because you think it is only for people more dedicated or more evolved than you? Anathapindika's example says, you might be more ready than you think. The profound teachings might be exactly what you need right now, not someday when conditions are perfect. And if you are waiting for permission to go deep, this is your permission from a man who received the deepest teaching of his life while dying and used it to transform suffering into liberation in his final hours. This is the 12th release, understanding that it is never too late to learn something profound, that you do not need special circumstances to access the deepest teachings, and that readiness is determined not by your life situation, but by the clarity of your seeing and the sincerity of your seeking. Anathapindika died hours after receiving teachings that changed everything, and those hours mattered infinitely more than the decades that preceded them. The moment you truly hear what you need to hear is the moment transformation becomes possible, regardless of how much time remains afterward. But transformation requires not just receiving wisdom, but extending it, not just being included, but remembering to include, especially those you have forgotten. King Bimbisara of Magadha was known for his generosity. He regularly hosted large offerings to monks and wandering ascetics, feeding hundreds at a time, giving freely from the royal treasury to support spiritual practitioners. After the Buddha's enlightenment, Bimbisara became one of his earliest and most devoted lay supporters, offering the Bamboo Grove Monastery and ensuring the Sangha never lacked for food or shelter. One day, after a particularly lavish offering ceremony, Bimbisara heard something that disturbed his sleep. Wailing, terrible cries of anguish coming from somewhere beyond the palace walls. Voices filled with desperate hunger and suffering. The sounds continued night after night, keeping him awake, filling him with unease he could not shake. Finally, he went to the Buddha and described what he was hearing. "Lord, every night I hear these cries of suffering. What are they? Why do they torment me?" The Buddha explained, "Great King, those are your relatives from past lives, parents, siblings, children who have died and been reborn as pretas, hungry ghosts. They are suffering from intense hunger and thirst, unable to find relief. They see you making generous offerings and performing merit, but you have not dedicated any of that merit to them. They are crying out because they are connected to you and yet receive nothing from your generosity. Bimbisara was shaken. He had been giving generously, supporting the Sangha, accumulating merit through his offerings. But he had never thought to share that merit with beings who had died, had never considered that his deceased relatives might benefit from his good actions if he intentionally directed the benefit toward them. The Buddha taught him the practice of merit transference, of consciously dedicating the positive effects of good actions, not just to himself, but to others, including those who had died. It was simple. After performing a generous act, make the explicit intention that the merit generated flows not only to you, but to all beings who could benefit, particularly those connected to you by relationship who might be suffering. The next time Bimbisara made an offering to the Sangha, he stood afterward and spoke aloud. May the merit of this offering extend to my relatives who have passed away, wherever they may be. May they receive benefit from this generosity. May it bring them relief and peace. That night, the wailing stopped. His relatives, receiving the dedicated merit, found relief from their suffering. The king slept peacefully for the first time in weeks, and from that day forward, he always remembered to share the merit of his generous actions with all beings, living and dead. This story appears in Buddhist cultures as the origin of a practice that continues today, the dedication of merit after any wholesome action, the conscious choice to share the benefit of good deeds rather than hoarding them for oneself. But beneath the cultural practice and the cosmology of hungry ghosts lies something more universal, about connection, about generosity, about what it means to truly share. Bimbisara thought he was being generous because he was giving away material goods, feeding monks, supporting good works, and he was generous in that way. But his generosity was incomplete because it did not include conscious connection to those who had a claim on his care, his own relatives, the people who had loved him and whom he had loved, who were suffering while he accumulated merit he never thought to share. You do not have to believe in hungry ghosts or the mechanics of merit transfer to recognize this pattern. How often do you do good things, help people, contribute to the world, but forget to extend that care to the people closest to you? How often is your generosity selective, given to those who make you look good or feel good, while the people who actually need it most, your family, your difficult relationships, the ones you have unfinished business with, receive nothing? The Pretas crying out were not strangers. They were Bimbisara's own relatives, people he had been connected to, people whose suffering was linked to him by bonds of relationship. His failure was not a failure to be generous in general, but a failure to let his generosity extend to the uncomfortable places, to the people he would rather not think about, to connections that required more than just material giving. When you dedicate merit, when you consciously direct the benefit of your good actions toward others, you are acknowledging that nothing you do exists in isolation. Your happiness is connected to others' happiness. Your peace is entangled with others' suffering. The good you create ripples out beyond what you can see, and you have some choice about where those ripples go if you pay attention and set intention. This practice of merit dedication has become routine in many Buddhist cultures, sometimes so routine that it loses its power and becomes mere formula. People mumble the dedication verses without really feeling the intention behind them, without genuinely wishing for the benefit to reach others. But when done with sincerity, the practice cultivates something essential: the recognition that your well-being and others' well-being are not separate, that true generosity extends beyond the transactional, that care requires conscious attention to who you are including and who you might be leaving out. The Buddha's instruction to Bimbisara was not, "Believe in hungry ghosts and perform this ritual." It was, "Notice who you are forgetting in your generosity and bring them back into the circle of your care." The Pretas were suffering not because the merit did not exist, but because it was never consciously directed toward them. Bimbisara's relatives were forgotten, and that forgetting was its own kind of harm. Who have you forgotten in the circle of your care? What relationships have you left unfinished? What connections have you abandoned? What people are you ignoring while you direct your energy and generosity towards safer, easier recipients? The wailing in Bimbisara's story is the sound of those forgotten connections crying out for attention, for inclusion, for the extension of care that relationship demands. This does not mean you owe everyone everything, or that you must maintain toxic relationships out of obligation. It means noticing when you are being selectively generous, when you are helping strangers while ignoring family, when you are giving to people who make you feel good while neglecting people whose needs make you uncomfortable. It means asking, is my generosity comprehensive or just convenient? The practice of dedicating merit after meditation, after giving, after any wholesome action, serves as a reminder that the point is not to accumulate spiritual points for yourself, but to contribute to the reduction of suffering everywhere, including in places you would rather not look. When you sit quietly and dedicate the peace you have cultivated to all beings, you are training yourself to let go of the hoarding instinct, to recognize that peace shared is not peace diminished, but peace multiplied. Bimbisara could have dismissed the Buddha's explanation. He could have said, "These are just superstitious beliefs about ghosts, not relevant to my actual life." But instead, he recognized the deeper teaching, that his generosity had been incomplete, that he had been forgetting people who deserve to be included, that true giving requires attention to who receives and why. After he began dedicating merit, the wailing stopped, not because he had magically fed hungry ghosts, but because he had repaired something in himself, the split between public generosity and private neglect, between the care he showed to impressive recipients and the care he withheld from difficult ones. His relatives, whether literal beings in another realm or metaphors for his own guilt and unfinished business, received what they needed: acknowledgement, inclusion, the extension of care into uncomfortable territory. The practice asks, when you do something good, can you genuinely wish for everyone to benefit, including people you do not like, including people you have hurt, including people who have hurt you, including people who are dead and cannot thank you or repay you? Can you let your generosity be truly generous, given freely without expectation, extended universally without selectivity, offered even when no one will know or appreciate it? This is harder than it sounds. The mind wants to hoard, wants to keep the good feeling for itself, wants to give only to people who deserve it by some internal calculus of worth. Merit dedication practice trains against that instinct, cultivates the muscle of unconditional generosity, practices letting go of even the good you create, so it can flow where it needs to flow, rather than where you want it to go. Bimbisara's story ends with peace. The wailing stops, he sleeps well. The forgotten are remembered and included. That peace came not from doing more good deeds, but from directing the good he was already doing toward everyone rather than just toward the convenient recipients. The practice did not require more effort, just more consciousness, more intention, more willingness to extend care into all the corners he had been avoiding. This is the 13th release, understanding that generosity is incomplete when it excludes anyone, that the benefit of your good actions can extend further than you imagine if you consciously direct it, and that true care means remembering to include even the forgotten, even the difficult, even the dead who can never repay you. The wailing in your own life, the guilt, the unfinished business, the relationships you have abandoned might quiet if you bring those people back into the circle of your care, even if only in the privacy of your own intention to wish them well, to include them in whatever peace and goodness you manage to create. Bimbisara discovered that the generosity he thought was complete was actually leaving out the people who needed it most, and when he corrected that oversight through conscious dedication, the suffering stopped, not because merit is magic, but because inclusion heals what exclusion wounds, and remembering repairs what forgetting has broken. You began carrying weight that did not belong to you. Now, notice what feels lighter. Kisa Gotami set down the burden of suffering alone and discovered she never was alone. Sona set down relentless pushing and found the rhythm that sustains. Malunkya Putta set down endless questions and picked up the only question that mattered: what reduces suffering now? The traveler set down the raft that saved him because dry land required different tools. The acrobat set down the belief that sacrifice protects others and discovered that self-care is mutual care. Siddhartha set down the palace walls and met reality without armor. King Pasenadi set down postponement when he saw the mountains already moving. Shariputra set down the need for elaborate teachings when 4 lines struck home. The blind turtle surfaced through impossible odds, reminding you, this life is not ordinary. The Buddha set down his doubt and taught for those with little dust in their eyes. The young monk set down dangerous pleasures for lasting peace. Anathapindika set down the belief it was too late and found liberation in his final hours. Bimbisara set down selective generosity and remembered the forgotten. 13 encounters, 13 releases, one truth running through them all. Suffering ends, not through gaining, but through letting go. The Buddha taught this 25 centuries ago because it was true then. You hear it now because it remains true today. Your suffering is real. Your liberation is possible. And the path between them is walked one release at a time. May you be peaceful. May you be free.